All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today, things are getting kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about immigration enforcement butting heads with religious freedom. A real clash, you know. And we've got this CBS News article breaks down a judge's ruling.
Right.
And it's causing, well, a lot of buzz, let's just say.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Plus, we've got statements from both sides, you know, the Trump administration and the religious groups right in the thick of it.
Yeah, right at the center.
So where do we even start unpacking this?
Well, I think the judge's decision is a good place to start.
Okay, yeah, let's start there.
So we've got a federal judge in Maryland, and he's issuing this preliminary injunction, which basically puts a legal pause on the Trump administration's power to carry out immigration enforcement.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's only at specific houses of worship.
Oh, so it's not like a blanket ban everywhere. Just,
no, very specific.
Just at certain religious spots.
Exactly.
Got it. So which ones are we talking about here?
So the injunction protects places of worship, specifically those belonging to Quakers, Cooperative Baptists, and Sikhs.
Okay, those are the groups who filed the lawsuit, right?
Yes, those are the groups who initiated the lawsuit.
Makes sense. So the judge is basically stepping in, saying, hold on.
Right.
At least when it comes to these particular groups.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they had a pretty strong argument.
Oh, they did.
For the judge to take that kind of action.
They really did.
Yeah.
Their argument boils down to this.
Okay.
If you allow immigration arrests at their places of worship, it just creates this atmosphere of fear, you know, disrupts their religious practices.
Yeah, I can see that.
Imagine you're trying to worship, connect spiritually, but you're constantly worried about being detained or deported.
Yeah, it's hard to find peace in that kind of environment.
Right. It's not conducive to that kind of spiritual experience.
No.
And the judge seems to agree that this fear has real consequences.
Yeah, he even cited the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, right?
He did, yeah.
In his decision.
Which basically says the government cannot substantially burden a person's exercise of religion without a very good reason.
Oh, interesting.
Really compelling reason.
Gotcha.
And Judge Chuang, he was appointed by President Obama, by the way. He found that the Trump administration's policy likely crosses that line, violates these groups' First Amendment rights.
So he's saying that, like, the potential harm to these religious communities outweighs the government's interest in enforcing immigration law.
Yeah.
At least in this specific context.
In this specific context, yeah.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is a bold statement, and I think to really understand the weight of it, you have to consider communal worship. How integral it is to these faiths. Take Quakers, for example, their meetings. They're all about shared silence, waiting upon the Spirit, coming together as a community.
Right.
And their history in the U.S., it goes way back to the 1600s.
That's a long time.
Centuries of practicing their faith here.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective.
So for them, it's not just about undocumented immigrants. It's about protecting their way of life, deeply rooted in their faith and their history here.
And I'm guessing the Cooperative Baptists, they share that emphasis on community.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
We're talking over 1,400 churches across the country.
Wow, that's a lot.
And many have large immigrant populations. And for them, welcoming these communities in, serving them, it's a core part of their religious mission.
So they're actively involved in ministries that support and advocate for immigrants.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I can see how immigration enforcement can really disrupt that work.
It creates tension.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have the Sikh community, especially a large temple near Sacramento, California. Roughly half the congregation are immigrants there.
Wow.
This case really shines a light on the fact that this isn't an isolated issue.
No, not at all.
It's affecting diverse religious communities.
Yeah, all over the nation.
Nationwide.
It's like this microcosm of the bigger debate, you know, happening all across the country.
Yeah.
How do we balance security with individual liberties?
Yeah, that's the question.
Like freedom of religion.
Exactly. And what makes this even more interesting, the judge didn't just issue a ruling based on abstract legal principles. He actually looked at the lived experiences of these communities. He acknowledged the real fear that's affecting not just undocumented immigrants, but also legal residents and citizens.
So everyone in these congregations is feeling it.
Everyone is feeling it.
That's a really important point.
It is.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal stuff.
Yeah.
But this is about real people's lives.
It's about people.
Yeah.
The judge recognized that this fear, this anxiety, it directly undermines their communal worship.
Yeah, which is like the cornerstone of these faiths.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where the heart of this case lies.
I think so.
It's about practicing your faith freely and without fear.
Yeah.
A right that's in our Constitution.
Absolutely. Enshrined in our Constitution.
Now, before we jump into the Trump administration's response and all the broader implications, I think we need to take a closer look at this Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Yes, let's dig into that.
It sounds like a pretty big deal here.
It is. It's crucial.
Yeah. Okay, so let's break down this Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Okay.
Sounds like it's a pretty big player in this whole thing.
Oh, it's central?
What does it actually say?
So the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA for short.
Okay.
RFRA was passed back in 1993.
Okay.
And basically, it sets a high bar for the government when it comes to restricting religious practices.
Okay. Interesting.
It says the government can't substantially burden someone's exercise of religion unless, and this is key, unless it can show it has a compelling interest.
Okay.
And not only that, it's using the least restrictive means possible.
Oh, so it's like they have to prove they have a really, really good reason.
Yeah, a super strong reason.
And there's absolutely no other way to do what they want without messing with someone's religious freedom.
Yeah, without infringing on those rights.
Got it.
And in this case, the judge found that the Trump administration, they didn't meet that standard.
Oh, really?
He's basically saying, while the government definitely has a compelling interest in enforcing immigration laws, doing these kinds of enforcement actions at places of worship, that's not the least restrictive way to do it.
That makes sense. There are other ways to enforce those laws.
Right, exactly.
Without disrupting services or creating that fear.
Yeah, without stepping on those religious practices.
So it's not that the government can't enforce immigration laws at all.
No, not at all.
They just have to be more mindful.
More attentive,
of the impact on these communities.
Exactly.
It sounds like the judge is trying to walk a fine line here.
He is. It's a delicate balance.
Recognizing religious freedom on one hand and national security on the other.
Absolutely. Two very important considerations.
He's not ignoring the government's concerns?
No, he acknowledges them.
But he's saying those concerns can't just override fundamental rights.
Exactly. Those rights have to be protected.
So how is the Trump administration taking this?
Oh, they're not happy.
I can imagine.
They've been very vocal about it.
Yeah.
They're arguing that the Biden-era memo...
Okay, the one that limited enforcement actions at certain places?
Yeah, like places of worship. They're saying it was tying their hands.
Oh, interesting.
Preventing them from doing their job effectively.
So they feel like it hindered their ability to enforce the law.
Exactly.
And they're saying criminals were taking advantage of these places.
Yeah, using them as safe havens.
Which they argue puts public safety at risk.
That's their argument.
So basically they're saying law enforcement should be able to make arrests wherever they need to.
No matter the location. Yeah. Regardless of where it is.
And that these blanket restrictions are just not practical.
Right. And potentially dangerous, they say.
So they think law enforcement agencies should be able to use their own judgment.
Use their common sense.
In these situations.
Exact.
And they think these limitations are unnecessary and counterproductive.
That's their stance.
So we have these two very different perspectives.
Yeah, a real clash.
On one side, the religious groups prioritizing their freedom to worship without fear.
And on the other side,
the Trump administration prioritizing law enforcement. It's like a classic example of balancing competing interests.
It really is.
And in this case, the judge seems to be siding with the religious freedom argument.
Yeah, he's giving that more weight in this particular context.
But what makes this case even more fascinating
Tell me.
is that it goes beyond just restating the arguments.
Okay.
The judge actually looks at how these religious practices are being impacted.
He goes deeper, yeah.
He's giving real-world context to what could seem like abstract legal principles.
I like that. He's grounding it in reality.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure.
How is he connecting the policy to what these communities are actually experiencing?
Okay, so he specifically points out that for Quakers and Sikhs, communal worship, it's not just a preference. It's fundamental to their faith. It's a deeply ingrained practice. It's central to their beliefs, their identity.
Right.
And he talks about how the fear of immigration enforcement, it just disrupts that sense of community, that shared spirituality that's so essential to their worship.
It's like it pollutes the whole atmosphere.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
He even uses the phrase effectively compels
wow.
to describe how this policy forces these groups to change their behavior.
Interesting.
They're essentially being pushed to worship in a way that goes against their core beliefs.
So it's not just a minor inconvenience.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's really affecting their ability to practice their faith.
It's a direct infringement, yeah.
And what about the Cooperative Baptists?
For them, he highlights their dedication to serving immigrant communities.
Right, that's a big part of their ministry.
He acknowledges the work they do, providing support and advocacy for these vulnerable populations. And he points out how the threat of immigration enforcement, it disrupts those efforts.
Yeah, it has to.
And creates tension within the congregation.
It's like he's saying, look, this isn't just about abstract legal principles. This is about real people. Real communities.
Real lives being affected.
Being negatively impacted by this policy.
In tangible ways.
Yeah, it's having a real impact.
Real consequences.
And by grounding his ruling in these lived experiences, he's making a strong case for why RFRA applies here.
Exactly. It's not just a theoretical argument anymore.
It's like he's saying the government can't just claim a general interest in immigration enforcement.
Right.
They need to show their actions are truly necessary.
And that they're using the least restrictive means.
And in this case, he's saying they haven't done that.
He's not going to.
So it's not just about upholding the law.
Right. It's more nuanced than that.
It's about upholding the law in a way that respects everyone's rights.
Regardless of their immigration status.
Or their religious beliefs.
Exactly.
And this case goes even further.
It does.
It raises these bigger questions about security and freedom.
Yeah. The balance between the two.
In our society.
Such a fundamental question.
It's like a microcosm of this huge debate.
It really is.
How far are we willing to go to protect one at the expense of the other?
Yeah, that's the question we're grappling with.
It forces us to confront some tough questions.
It does.
About our values as a nation.
What do we prioritize?
And what kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah, what kind of world are we creating?
Yeah, it's like this case is holding up a mirror. You know, forcing us to look at ourselves and ask, are we willing to give up certain freedoms for security? And where's the line?
It's a question people have been asking for ages, really.
It's like a constant struggle, right?
Absolutely. No easy answers.
But what's so interesting here is that this case brings those questions into focus, makes us really confront them.
It forces us to grapple with them head on.
And it's not just theoretical.
No.
We're talking about real people.
Right.
Whose lives are being affected.
Real consequences.
For these decisions.
This isn't just an intellectual debate. It's about people's right to practice their faith.
Yeah.
Freely and without fear.
It's about the government's duty.
Yes.
To protect its citizens and the Constitution.
And to find that balance.
Right.
Between sometimes competing interests.
Finding a way to make it just and equitable for everyone.
Absolutely. That's the key.
So as this case moves forward, what should we be looking out for?
Well, one thing to watch is the appeal process.
Okay.
The Trump administration has already said they'll challenge it.
Yeah, I figured they would.
This could go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Wow. So depending on how the higher courts rule, this could set a major precedent.
Absolutely. It could have ripple effects.
Yeah.
Far beyond just this one case.
So it could shape the legal landscape for years to come?
Yeah, at the intersection of religious freedom and immigration law.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's significant.
And it's not just about the legal side of things either.
Right.
This could impact the relationship between religious communities
Mm.
and law enforcement.
That's a good point.
Will this create more tension?
Yeah. Will it lead to distrust?
Or could it spark some kind of dialogue?
It could.
Lead to more understanding, even collaboration?
It's possible.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's something to watch for.
It's interesting because sometimes these legal battles,
I know, right?
they actually create these opportunities.
They open up the conversation.
Yeah, for bridge building.
Where it might not have happened otherwise.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the political context either.
Oh, absolutely not.
We're in such a polarized time.
So divided.
And these issues, immigration, religious freedom, they're often right at the center of it all.
They're hot button issues.
So how will this case be used by different political groups?
Yeah, how will they leverage it?
How might it affect public opinion?
Those are important questions.
It reminds us that these legal battles, they're not just isolated events.
No, they're connected.
They're part of these bigger social and political movements.
It's all intertwined.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listener?
Good question.
Well, first, I hope they come away with a better understanding that this isn't simple black and white.
It's nuanced.
There are strong arguments on both sides.
Absolutely.
And finding that balance, that sweet spot, it takes careful thought, empathy.
And a willingness to talk.
Yeah, even when we disagree.
Even when it's hard.
To have those respectful conversations.
I agree. That's so important.
And I hope our listeners feel empowered. These issues affect all of us.
They do.
And we all have a role to play.
In shaping the future.
In shaping the future of our country.
By staying informed. Engaging in these conversations and advocating for what we believe in.
Exactly. We can help ensure that both security and freedom are protected.
And that we create a just and equitable society.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of the same community.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
And finding solutions that work for everyone.
Right.
It takes listening to each other.
Understanding different perspectives.
And working together to find common ground.
Beautifully said, yeah.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
And with our listener.
Yes, thank you to our listener for joining us.
We hope you found it insightful.
And thought-provoking.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.